Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. In the last video, I talked about why SAML is awesome and why it is by far, in my opinion, the most secure authentication system, uh, at least that I've dealt with, possibly in the world. In this video, I'm going to turn the tables and rant about SAML and say why it is the worst authentication system in the world. Um, don't get me wrong, I still think SAML is awesome, and I would recommend it if you really want to invest in it and feel strongly about its positives. However, its negatives are right up there with in a different way than what I ranted about with JSON Web Tokens last week or a few videos ago, at least. In my mind, authentication systems should be really easy to get right and really difficult to get wrong. Because when you get authentication systems wrong, that's when security vulnerabilities happen. And I feel like as an application developer, as a security conscious application developer, we should be working to make security easy, kind of security on by default. Um, Whereas with things like SAML, it is really easy to get them wrong, really hard to get them right. I've worked through some pretty nasty SAML bugs in my day, and I say that like an old guy. Back in my day, like I've been doing this for decades and decades. I have been doing this for a while, but uh, you know uh, what I'm talking about with SAML is only within the last 5 years or so. So with SAML, it is really easy to do to make some mistakes that SAML will work, but you won't get all the benefits from it. So one of the ones that I mentioned in the last video about why I like SAML is there is a public key in the server response. There is a public key that the IDP says, here is the public key that corresponds to the private key. Of course, it's private, so I'm not showing you the private key, but here's the public key that corresponds to the key that I use to sign all this stuff. Yes, you can use that public key to verify the signature, or if it was encrypted, to decrypt all the stuff in the payload. However, you should not. Because what trust are you gaining by doing that? All you are doing is saying, okay, I trust that you gave me the right thing, or that you are who you say you are, right? Whereas this is the internet. We should not trust that anyone is who they say they are at all. We should only be trusting what we have previously determined is the proper public key to use to decrypt this stuff. So one thing you could do is validate that the public key that's been provided in the payload is the public key you have on file. But at that point, you might as well just use the public key you have on file. So my recommendation, use the public key you have on file to decrypt or validate signatures on what's coming back from the IDP, just to make sure. There is a similar thing you can do on the reverse side, but that's less of an issue because IDPs, they're made by people like Microsoft and Okta and OneLogin. They have a bunch of security-focused people making sure that they don't make silly mistakes like that. So if you're running into a situation like that, it's going to be on the your side, the service provider side. So that's one reason why SAML is terrible. You're going to make mistakes with it, but there is an easy way to correct it. The bigger issue with SAML, and this is not like it's not a security hole, but the bigger issue for me is that SAML is really, really, really tricky to debug because you're talking about encrypted payloads going across the wire and having to find or hold on to or use SSL certificates, or it's asymmetric keys, right? Having to make sure that you're using the right key for the right direction, because they don't use the same key, right? The service provider uses the service provider's private key to encrypt, and the IDP uses the service provider's public key to decrypt. The IDP uses its private key to encrypt, and the service provider uses the IDP's public key to decrypt. So two separate keys for the two different directions, two separate sets of keys. It's 4 keys total, two separate sets of keys for the two different directions. That's a lot of keys to manage, to keep track of. And if you are debugging somewhere along the line, this flow gets interrupted, you're probably going to end up having to find some key. It's kind of like, when your clothes washer, your clothes washing machine breaks, it is going to be full of a tank of water, invariably. Same thing with SAML. When it breaks, when you run into an issue, you are going to be debugging encrypted payloads, or severely challenging payloads to manage and debug and troubleshoot. So ultimately, this means that you're taking a payload, you need to decrypt it using a public key, the right public key, and then you have XML. There really isn't anything out there that validates this XML. So if you've been dealing with SAML for a while, you can look at XML and figure out what's going on and what's not right. But if you haven't been staring at SAML for months and months, you might be staring at an XML payload that looks totally fine, but for some reason it's not working. And to put the icing on the cake, a lot of IDPs don't log very extensively. They certainly don't expose very helpful error messages, because again, we're talking security here, we're talking authentication. Typically, an error message, a user exposed error message, should be as vague as possible. It should be something like authentication failed, because we don't want to expose any unnecessary information to an attacker that might help them further attack a system, which generally ends up meaning that they leave something to be desired when you're actually troubleshooting something like this. So it would be nice if there were a way that you could turn on debugging or something like that, but that would be misused in production all the time and would lead to some breached systems pretty quickly. So so basically, to summarize that, it's the development cost of SAML. There are authentication schemes that definitely don't have the security level that SAML does, or the aggressive security posture that SAML does, that are a lot easier for developers to troubleshoot and understand, especially if they're not already security engineers or well versed in authentication systems. OAuth 2 is pretty easy to get started with, as evidenced by the number of applications that do login with Facebook, login with Google. It's really easy to get started with OAuth. Not as easy to get onboarded onto SAML. SAML is very much a pain. I've worked with it quite a bit, but it is absolutely a pain to get started with. Absolutely a pain to debug and troubleshoot and work with. Definitely costs a lot of time and money for developers to be working with SAML. That isn't the case with something like OAuth 2. So those are the negatives that I have about SAML. It's easy to make mistakes, and they're really time consuming to fix. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, if you need to use SAML, go use SAML. Don't let this deter you, though hopefully this showed you some of the pitfalls. If it did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. I really appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell, and leave a comment down below if you want to join the conversation, because I definitely want to have you join the conversation. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. That will probably be in 2022 after the new year. So have a great New Year celebration if you do that sort of thing. Don't party too hard. We want to see you in 2022. Look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching.